Hello, I'm Sheila Webber, and I'm sorry that I'm not there with you today. I'm going to be talking about media and information literacy, strength through diversity. And these are key points that I'll be returning to in my presentation. The first is that media and information literacy are both contextual. Information is different, and media and information literacy are different, depending on the person, the organisation, and the nation. Each of these is in its own context. And the importance of context is really a main focus for information literacy research currently, and that's internationally. And also, these differences matter. Media and information are important, and they're complex. And it's not just the mind that they engage, they also engage people's hearts and spirits. And I think that's very important. Again, it's a point I'll be coming back to. And I think that uncovering and celebrating these differences, rather than trying to pretend there's a uniform media and information literacy worldwide, could increase pride, it could motivate people to get involved and actually take these issues seriously, and increase ownership of media and information literacy internationally. I wanted to start with a quotation from one of my former PhD students, now Dr. Shahad Salha, who's from Syria. And I'll be talking about her research later on. She said that information literacy is not a fashion, it's not a fad, but a human mosaic art. We all conceive it differently, and we all share in designing it. And that's really a theme that I'm going to be taking up. It's going to be there throughout the presentation. I see media and information literacy at 3 levels. There's the media and information literacy of the individual within his or her family, or workplace, or community, or nation. And this includes the conflicts that individuals experience whilst they're trying to balance their very complicated lives and moving through their lives. And I'll be coming to that in the next slide. There's the media and information literacy of organisations, that they need to be information literate and media literate too, as they interact with the outside world and also with their own employees. Bill Johnston and I have done work for some time now on the Information Literate University, but this applies to all kinds of organisations. It's a responsibility of the organisation to be media and information literate, not just the people within it. And then there's the government and country, which is obviously a big focus of this particular meeting, interacting and acting, and also interacting with the wider world as well as their own citizens. Bill Johnston and I developed our diagram of the information literate person in the changing information culture and society over a decade ago, and we identified a number of factors that influence people and mean that their information needs and their information literacy needs change over time. They'll have different personal goals, values and habits at different life stages, and as they have different life experiences. They may be working for different organisations and will have to learn about different missions, values, the norms of that particular organisation and their information strategy. They may experience different local and national cultures and society. They will be influenced by their religion, by the people around them, by their communities. Technical changes will influence the way they interact with information. There will be differences in the information economy. For example, there may be changes to the copyright law, and changes in media also have an influence. For example, the way in which we deal with priced and free information has changed a lot because of what is available on the internet, what's possible now that wasn't possible before. I'm going to use an example from a couple of days ago, an example of something I saw when I was walking along the street, just to illustrate my point of how things change for just the same individual at different points in time. So, there's a fire engine drawn up nearby. This is a hospital. There are people waiting outside, but more than usual, so I think they've come from inside. But they look very relaxed. Some of them are even leaning against the wall, waiting to go back in. So my experience tells me that here in Sheffield in 2012, this is going to be a fire alarm. It's probably not a real fire, otherwise people wouldn't look so relaxed, and there'd be more things going on, more ambulances, so I can just walk by and be quite relaxed. If I was really concerned, I could ask someone. That would be the best way, the most information literate way of getting information in this situation, rather than going on the internet, even though that's something I could do if I was a shy person and didn't want to talk to other people directly. Now, if this had been in the 1980s, when I was working in London, in central London for the British Library, and I'd seen this kind of situation, I would have reacted a bit differently. Because in those days there were IRA bombings, there were bomb threats in London, and we did actually have a small bomb go off at the end of one of the British Library buildings, the one I worked in. And so I would have been a bit more tense. I would have been looking much more closely. Perhaps this is a bomb alert. Should I be worried? Should I be doing anything? And this is in a country which wasn't suffering a major war or internal conflict. It was relatively minor considering some of the things that are going on in the world at the moment. But nevertheless, in those two different situations, when they'd looked superficially the same, I, at that moment in time, would have reacted differently, would have known that my information behaviour should be different. I should be gathering different kinds of information to be information literate in those situations. Also, 20 years ago, the option of looking on Twitter, finding out from discussion on Flickr, those wouldn't have been available to me in the same way that they are today. So today there are actually more sophisticated, more complex options that I might be turning over in my mind if I was deciding, what shall I do in this moment? How should I react to this situation? Another point which I wanted to make was that information literacy education, which are just focused on textual information and academic context, would not have necessarily helped me in my decision-making process in that situation. It would have been helpful to me to have everyday information literacy brought into the classroom, which I do, to some extent, aim to do with my own students, obviously. I've given a quotation here about this necessity to think about the wider meaning of information and media information literacy from a study to do with nursing information. I'm now going to put before you a quotation from Shahd Salhal's study of Syrian school librarians, one of her interviewees who was talking about how her own idea of information literacy had broadened. I'm going to be going on to talk in more detail about two studies to do with information literacy in particular countries, Thailand and Syria. But I would also want to mention that research has been done into just subject contexts and work contexts for information literacy and the specific needs of information literacy in those contexts. In particular, because it ties in a little with my example, I'm going to highlight Lloyd and her study of ambulance workers and their information needs and literacy. She emphasised how they used all their senses, sound, speech, touch, appearance, movement, when they were in a crisis situation to gather information and evaluate information very quickly and reach a decision about what to do with the patient. But as I said, I'm going to be concentrating on two particular studies of former PhD students, looking at information literacy in different cultural contexts. First of all, that of Dr. Fusadi Dokhrom. She did a case study of conceptions of information literacy of undergraduate students in the Faculty of Arts, Silpakorn University, Thailand, which is where she's now head of department. I've highlighted here that the arts faculty at Silpakorn University, their vision is to develop human beings to be balanced physically, intellectually, spiritually and socially. And I would say this mention of spirituality is something that you don't tend to get in British universities. That kind of vision doesn't tend to be worded in that kind of way. When she eventually did her case study, a number of the aspects of information literacy were pretty much what we get in Western views of information literacy and Western frameworks. But one thing which did emerge was that key part of information literacy was attitudes of the students. The enthusiasm, determination, open-mindedness. And I've given here some quotations. By the way, this presentation will be on SlideShare, and it's likely to be on YouTube. It will be accessible for looking at this in more detail. But this is a slightly different picture, a different attitude that is expected of the students by the lecturers and by the students themselves. So this means even in a context that has international similarities, i.e. university education, there were new things emerging that seemed to be culturally contextualised. Her information literate person, derived from her research, is someone who is an active, self-directed learner, who is knowledgeable and regularly acquires new information with understanding, as well as having the ability to research and use information within an awareness of a variety of formats. So that's the definition that she derived from her research study. Then moving on to Shahd Salha and her study of conceptions of information literacy of Syrian school librarians. She was using a phenomenographic approach, so she was interviewing them and looking for variations in their conceptions of information literacy. And she did indeed find 7 different ways in her final analysis, 7 different ways in which this group of Syrian school librarians thought about and conceived of information literacy. Again, you can look at the detail of this study afterwards, but I'm just going to read out the main headings. That the 7 ways were: as an elite idea for outstanding people, information literacy as a catalyst for change, information literacy as an illumination, information literacy as subject to the purpose, information literacy as a collaborative process, information literacy as a long-term process, and information literacy as a method to support an educational process. So some very different ways of thinking about information literacy, and some of them connected to spiritual values and to vision and particular educational contexts. And I'm going to finish this little phase by again giving one of the quotations of Shahd's interviewees, one who had an illumination conception of information literacy. So, finally, I'm returning to the key points that I made at the start. Firstly, that media and information literacy is contextual. Secondly, that the differences matter, the differences that have been revealed by research studies such as the ones I've talked about. These studies also show that media and information literacy are important and complex and engage people's hearts and spirits. Uncovering and celebrating these differences, I believe, could increase pride, motivation and ownership of media and information literacy in each country and therefore internationally. So what does this mean in practical terms? I'm returning here to another UNESCO publication by Woody Horton, his primer for information literacy. And there he says that the appropriate national authorities should develop a national information literacy and lifelong strategy and vision for the country as a whole, and admonish all other institutions, each sector and citizens to treat the area as a high priority. So this is an earlier publication that's also making the point of trying to develop a national information literacy strategy, one that is... So, I believe that government should prioritise development of their own vision of what media and information literacy means to their own citizens. In doing this, they could get a focus from citizens' key life stages following a citizen's life through and its changing media and information literacy needs, and key occupations. There could be case studies, small case studies of occupations as a starting point, leading to more in-depth research. Government should obviously work with researchers as well as practitioners. The article I've cited there mentions that practitioners, policymakers and researchers all have a slightly different focus for information literacy, and it would be much more powerful if they were working more closely together. So, indicators for individual, corporate and government media and information literacy are needed. I think that corporate media and information literacy could be focused on specific sectors, for example, incorporating some indicators for the health sector into the MIL indicators, not trying to cover every sector, but just the ones which already particularly value media and information literacy. This could also be a focus for talking outside this framework with multinationals, because multinational corporations are so influential and they may well be engaged in learning about media information literacy and explaining how they work with their employees and the wider world. Finally, it's important not to lose the heart and soul of media and information literacy, the vision that's been driving the need for MIL indicators. And I want to finish with another quotation from Shad Salha's interviewees talking about information literacy. Thank you.